This land belongs to community now. That's what she actually yelled at me, chin lifted like she was blessing the ground with her presence. Claudia stood there, smug as a headline, in front of a 4-story building that didn't exist 3 months ago, standing exactly where my vegetable garden used to be. I'd been gone a single season. I left behind tomatoes, peppers, and fruit trees. I came back to limestone walls, balconies, a paved parking lot, and a carved sign over oak doors at Red Grand Haven Community Center and in, on my lawn. She waved papers at me. Emergency permits, she claimed, like some self-appointed steward of the public good. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I just stared at her and thought, you chose the wrong person's yard to steal. The building is impossible to ignore. 2 long 3-story wings stretch across what used to be my front lawn, hugging the footprint like it was designed for this exact plot. This isn't a fence line mistake. It's a complex. From the landscaping to the bronze-framed windows, you can see months of planning and a steady flow of money. Whoever orchestrated it spared no expense on materials or craftsmanship. The limestone blocks are precisely cut and laid. The roofing is charcoal architectural shingles that match the stone. The windows are double-pane energy-efficient glass. Decorative iron railings curl in hand-forged scrollwork along the balconies. Mature trees and flowering shrubs are already set in beds around the foundation to make it look established, like it had always been here, like I was the one who misunderstood my property line. My first impulse was to call 911, but how do you even phrase that? Hello, someone built a hotel and community center on my lawn. It sounded ridiculous, even in my head, so I walked forward instead, studying the details that would matter later. A delivery receipt stuck out of my mailbox. Invoice number RC47291. Addressed to Grand Haven Community Project, East Property Line. East Property Line. That's my boundary marker. Someone used my markers as a coordination reference for large-scale illegal development on private property. The front entrance has custom-carved wooden doors with brass hardware that probably cost more than the first truck I ever owned. I stood there staring at the money in plain sight. Money that didn't belong to me. A structure nobody asked me to approve. A project I never would have allowed. Right then she emerged with the timing of a stage actor. Claudia Hale, 48, president of the HOA for 3 years. The sort of person who treats a title like a scepter. Gray hair perfectly styled, blazer pressed, folder tucked against her chest. She smiled like she was unveiling a charity, not presiding over an illegal development on someone else's land. Evan, wonderful timing, she said, all sugar and PR polish. We had to act quickly for community safety, emergency needs. The fire marshal granted emergency access for fuel reduction and community infrastructure. It's all authorized. She had the tone of someone who'd rehearsed the explanation in a mirror. Emergency, I repeated. You build a multi-story community center, and on private property, without consent. That's not emergency management. That's illegal development. She hugged her folder tighter. The fire marshal granted crisis permits for community works, she said again, like the repetition would make it true. We followed proper emergency protocols for public safety. Show me the permit, I said. Community centers require city planning approval and zoning compliance, not fire permits. Environmental impact studies, public hearings. You don't build entertainment facilities under emergency access. She didn't hand me the folder. She didn't open it. Everything was handled through the appropriate channels, she insisted, as if the building behind her was a badge. A sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway. A neighbor had called in a suspicious person at my house, me, after a 3-month absence. The deputy stepped out, tall and steady, the kind of officer who doesn't get riled by a confident voice and a shiny binder. Deputy Aaron Blake introduced himself, took a long look at the building, and his face changed. That measured, professional calm took on an edge of gravity. Sir, he said to me first, then pivoted to taking the structure. I received a call about a property dispute. He paused, scanning the facade, the parking lot striping, the landscaping that had been trees I'd nurtured for years. This appears to be illegal development on private property. I'm going to secure this site and call the building department for immediate inspection. Finally, someone who understood the difference between HOA authority and property rights. Claudia jumped in with urgent conviction. Officer, this is community emergency infrastructure authorized through proper safety channels. All permits were filed appropriately for emergency development and fire safety compliance. Deputy Blake didn't flinch. He walked the perimeter, snapping photos, jotting notes. Ma'am, emergency permits don't cover permanent multi-story construction, he said evenly. This requires comprehensive city approval, environmental review, zoning clearance, and building permits before construction starts. The deputy roped off the site with yellow tape. In one gesture, Claudia's showpiece turned from community asset into a crime scene. I walked to the spot where my tomatoes used to climb their cages. Asphalt now, perfectly striped. Handicapped space near the entrance. The fruit trees, gone from their rows, relocated to give visitors a sight line to the double doors. In a corner of construction, debris something caught my eye. A wrench. Rusty. Heavy. Familiar. Empty 1967 etched into the handle. My grandfather's wrench. I thought I lost it years ago fixing a busted pipe. I never noticed the markings before. Now, the letters felt like a message raised out of the past. The inspector arrived at 7:30 a.m. with the deputy. I've never seen the neighborhood so awake. Everyone stood on porches, like it was a parade, with crime scene tape as the floats. Inspector Martinez moved slowly, professionally, eyes tracing every line, every joint. He wasn't just looking for what was wrong. He was building a record of how wrong it was. Neighbors drifted closer, and the stories spilled out. I heard her yelling on the phone, said Mrs. Grande from across the street, voice shaking with that tight anger people hold for weeks. A week after you left, she said, we need concrete pour before the tax guy returns. Odd, right? So I recorded it. She tapped her phone and added, she showed me paper stamped with city seals, but she never let anyone keep copy. When I asked what fire safety had to do with all this, she told me I was selfish, said I didn't care about lives. I pulled up my own security logs. Week by week, my cameras had watched the transformation while I was out of state on business. Week 1, trenching classified as drainage work. Month 1, lumber delivery labeled storm shelter framing. Month 2, safety shelter final stage. Month 3, landscaping as neighborhood asset. Every phase had been renamed something smaller and more innocent than it really was. Deception wasn't incidental. It was designed. Emergency permits don't cover a community center with an inn, Inspector Martinez said, taking close-ups of the stonework and the landscaping. This was a multi-month build. Someone intentionally distorted the scope and their authority to avoid planning, zoning, and building reviews. My phone buzzed with a blocked email. Attached was a red-lined image of a signature. Forged. Look at the T-curve on page 3. The note read, not the city planner style. I passed it to Deputy Blake. He added it to a growing folder that was starting to feel heavy with proof. I called the city planner's office and got through right away. I described the scene. Her reply was direct. No permits were ever filed for a community center at that address, she said, voice tight with concern. A project like you're describing would require environmental impact studies, public hearings, planning commission review, months of front-end process. Community facilities cannot be authorized by a fire official. Emergency access has limits. A door opened and out walked Marcus Thompson, the general contractor, mid-40s, a familiar name in our county. He's built more houses than I can count. The man looked like someone had walked over his grave. He held a thick folder with both hands like it might crumble. Inspector, he said quietly, these are the permits she gave me. His hands shook as he set the folder down. If these are invalid, I've been building without authorization for 3 months. 20 years in this county, no violations. Not one. If this is fraud, my license is... He didn't finish. The inspector scanned the documents, then compared the seals and signatures to examples from his casebook. We'll verify with city records immediately. A project of this size requires multiple agencies' approvals. The sequences here look wrong. I started building my own timeline. USPS hold mail receipts with tracking numbers showing I'd requested a 3-month pause for a business trip, signed in my name. Lawn service invoices with GPS stamped photos that capture the construction progression, whether they meant to or not. Security system logs of trucks arriving and leaving. Property tax records paid in full, on schedule, on paper and in pixels. I was away legitimately while someone developed my land without consent. Neighbors kept talking. Mr. Williams said Claudia assured him the noise was quick crisis repair work. Mrs. Patterson remembered being told the material piles were for community safety infrastructure. Each neighbor got a tailored story, carefully calibrated for exactly what they'd push back on. That was the part that frayed me. The manipulation, not just the theft, but the choreography of it. This isn't an HOA emergency power issue anymore, I told Deputy Blake. This is calculated fraud and illegal development, property conversion, permit fraud, abuse of authority. He nodded once. Mr. Brooks, that's how it appears. By mid-morning, building code enforcement had arrived with measuring equipment and documentation cameras. The strange thing was the construction itself was sound. Structural concrete had proper rebar and forming. Electrical panels were installed according to code. Plumbing rough-ins were done with the right pipe sizes. Smoke detection and sprinklers were in place. The HVAC system was neatly laid out and energy efficient. The craft was there. The legality was not. The work shows skilled labor, Martinez said while photographing a junction box. But there are no permits for any of it. No recorded inspections. Someone knew how to build correctly and decided to avoid the legal process entirely. Marcus came back out, face gone pale. You assured me everything was filed, he said to Claudia, his voice fighting for calm. You told me crisis authorizations were approved across departments. Zoning, planning, safety. Claudia snapped her folder closed. This is red tape panic, she said. We can file retroactively under crisis authorization. The law allows that. Marcus almost laughed, a sound with no humor. Environmental impact studies happen before shovels go in the ground. Traffic analysis, soil testing, public hearings. There is no retroactive environmental clearance just because a building is sitting here. Deputy Blake reviewed HOA documents provided by the treasurer, Sarah Martinez, who looked like she was bracing for a storm and hoping it would pass by someone else's house. $400,000 used for emergency community infrastructure with no board authorization, he said, brow raised. Sarah's eyes stayed fixed on the table. Claudia approved it under emergency rights, she said quietly. But anything over $50,000 requires a board vote. We never saw this project. We never approved it. The money trail told a story of the stone and shingles didn't. The whole HOA reserve gone. 15 years of dues from neighbors spent without a vote. And then there was a detonator, a personal guarantee. Claudia had put up her own house as collateral for construction loans on an unauthorized project built on someone else's land. If the center failed, she would lose everything. It explained the bulldozer momentum, the pressure, the blame. It didn't excuse the fraud. I took another look at my grandfather's wrench. MT 1967. A hunch sent me into the county archives, and there it was. MT Construction, my grandfather's company, laid out the original infrastructure plans here in 1967. Easements, streets, utilities. The rival bidder that year, Hale Construction. The county had awarded the work to MT. Claudia's father had lost those bids. The past, resurrected in forged signatures and illegal concrete. This wasn't random, I told Deputy Blake later, handing him the files. She chose this property. She chose my name. News vans arrived before lunchtime. A property dispute with crime scene tape has a way of pulling the city's eyes toward your street. Lights came on. Microphones appeared. The reporter from Channel 7 framed her live shot with the building behind her. Tonight, an HOA president is accused of constructing a community center on a resident's private land without permission, she said. The case raises questions about HOA authority, property rights, and the limits of emergency powers. Claudia gave interviews in her best blazer, speaking slowly and carefully to the camera. I've served this community faithfully for 15 years, she said, deflecting away from the forged documents and toward her dedication. This center will provide services for everyone. One person shouldn't block progress. The split in the neighborhood happened fast. Some people saw the limestone and the landscaping and imagined concerts, meetings, birthday parties. Others saw yellow tape, disappearing reserve funds, and a precedent that had got homeowner rights across the city. Property rights aren't a trend. They're law. You don't trade them for amenities. Can't we find a way to make this lawful? Mrs. Grande asked me after the cameras left. She spoke softly, tugged in two directions at once. It's almost done and it's beautiful. If we make it work now, I told her, we teach every HOA president that property law is optional when the goal is popular. That's not community. That's power. The district attorney's office weighed in after reviewing the inspector's photos, the forged permits, the financial records, and Marcus's communication logs. They were considering multiple charges: unauthorized use of HOA funds, property fraud, permit fraud. This was no longer a headline. It was a case. The HOA board held an emergency meeting without Claudia. You could hear the shock in their voices through the open windows. Tom Williams said what everyone else was thinking. She never presented the project for board review. She exceeded her authority dramatically and exposed every homeowner to risks we never agreed to accept. Then came the part one didn't expect. A city planner, my anonymous tipster, requested a meeting. She'd maintained strict professional boundaries the entire time, sending me public records links and procedural checklists in response to my requests so she wouldn't compromise her office. In the meeting, she explained why she'd helped. Forged city documents don't just hurt one homeowner, she said. They threaten public trust. Our planning process is there to protect everyone equally, including people who want community facilities. It didn't slow Claudia. She held impromptu curbside press conferences, painting herself as a martyr. 20 years of service destroyed by one selfish person who doesn't care about community, she told one reporter, eyes shining to the last row of the audience. The message worked on some people. Others had heard enough about progress to last a lifetime. A neighborhood committee formed around my coffee table. 20 people deciding to learn the law instead of pick a side based on yard signs. Attorney Margaret Foster volunteered to answer questions as a guest at our next gathering. Property rights exist under constitutional protection, she explained, standing in my living room while rain tapped the windows. HOA authority has limits. Presidents cannot authorize construction on private lots regardless of claimed community benefits. Emergency powers are not a shortcut around zoning laws, building permits, or consent of the owner. Meanwhile, Marcus kept showing up at the district attorney's office, at my door, at meetings, bringing documentation that no prosecutor could ignore. I was misled, he said again and again. I accept responsibility for not verifying to the city independently. He transferred copies of all construction files to me. He stood in front of neighbors he'd built homes for and promised he'd never let this happen again. It matters when people use their name to admit a mistake and then fix it publicly. 60 days later, charges were filed. The plea negotiations that followed weren't about vengeance. They were about repair. Justice isn't always a hammer. Sometimes it's a level, getting the line straight again. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom felt like a place where air weighed more. Judge Patricia Wells reviewed the agreement clause by clause. Miss Hale violated land law and misused HOA authority systematically, she said, clear and even. However, genuine intent to serve the community and full cooperation during prosecution merit a constructive resolution rather than an extended sentence that serves no beneficial purpose. The resolution was careful and exact. Claudia would complete 6 months of community service focused on HOA governance education and ethics. She would accept a suspended sentence. She would forever be barred from holding any HOA leadership role in the state. She would provide financial restitution for legal costs and property damage, personally, without shifting liability to the HOA. Most importantly, the court ordered full title transfer of the community center complex to me as the victim of construction fraud. For the first time since I returned home, something landed where it belonged. After the hearing, the county clerk met me with a folder of historical documents. Your grandfather's original infrastructure easements from 1967 confirm your family's long-standing property rights here, she said, handing me copies. MT Construction made this neighborhood possible, legally and properly. The city planner shook my hand. Your grandfather built reliable foundations, she said. We need people to do the same with process. I walked back to the building with a new set of keys and a veteran's appreciation for paperwork. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted the building's purpose corrected, to become what it should have been if it had started the right way. I'm establishing the Brooks Community Foundation, I told the neighbors gathered out front. This facility will operate lawfully. 20% of revenue will fund community programs, but will follow zoning laws, obtain building permits, and respect homeowner rights. Everything will be transparent. No shortcuts. I brought my grandfather's wrench that afternoon, the one marked MT 1967. I used it to tighten the bolts on a new sign, not carved into limestone this time, but mounted clean and true. Brooks Community Center. Privately held. Community operated. Built right this time. Mrs. Patterson came up beside me as I took a step back to look at it. You could have pushed for more punishment, she said softly. You could have tried to ruin her. Instead, you made something that helps everybody. Punishment alone doesn't pour a foundation. I told her. Following the law does. Marcus shook my hand before he left. I learned the right lesson the hard way, he said. Verify permits. Respect zoning. Work with the building department. No exceptions. In the weeks that followed, the calls started. Hi, this is Pine Valley HOA. We heard about your case, and we want guidance for our next community project. I said the same thing to every caller. Start with the city planners. Hold public hearings. Commission environmental impact studies when required. Obtain rail building permits. Respect homeowner rights. Follow zoning laws. Document everything. Emergency authority has specific limits to prevent abuse. Compliance is an obstacle, it's the road. The building that once stood as a monument to overreach and permit fraud became something else entirely. A lesson in property rights and constitutional protections turned into practice. The foundation stayed in place, but now the operation rested on a legal footing. We created governance bylaws that required board votes for expenditures over a set amount. We posted our minutes. We gave our neighbors a voice before we broke ground on anything. Claudia's final public statement came quietly. I believed I was helping the community, she said to a cluster of reporters on the courthouse steps. I was wrong about my authority and the legal process. I'm relieved the facility will serve its intended purpose under proper ownership. The truth is, intentions are not a defense against violating property law. Good intentions can't bulldoze constitutional protections or negate zoning rules and building permits. Community benefits don't materialize just because someone wants them badly enough. They come from a lawful process that respects homeowner rights equally, especially when the cause sounds noble. It took 3 months to build a community center illegally. It took 60 days to assemble the evidence and move the legal system. It took a single hearing to change the title. It will take years to keep earning trust from people who opened their front doors and saw yellow tape where their HOA needed to be. That's fine. Good things built the right way are allowed to take time. I stood under the sign at dusk and watched porch lights blink on across the street. A couple walked by with their dog and waved. The deputy who'd roped the place off that first day stopped his cruiser and rolled down the window. Good outcome, he said. Good process, I answered. He smiled and drove on. I thought about my grandfather tightening bolts with the same wrench, about those initials, MT, etched deeper than the rust. He always said the same thing after a job was done. Build things the right way, not the fast way. Shortcuts and foundations cause problems for generations. It was true under our feet and true in our laws. The best protection for property rights isn't a vendetta against people who make ruinous mistakes. It's insisting that everyone, HOA presidents, contractors, neighbors, all of us, follows the same rules that safeguard communities through legal foundations rather than illegal shortcuts. They built a community center on my land. While I was away, they ignored zoning laws, bypass building permits, and trample homeowner rights because they believed the cause was noble enough to justify it. In the end, the law didn't just stop them. It made it right. The title transferred legally. The facility stayed standing under proper ownership. The neighborhood kept the benefit without sacrificing constitutional protections. Justice and healing didn't fight each other. They worked together. That's how community is supposed to work. That's how property rights are supposed to work. And that's how this place will operate going forward. Built right, by the book, in the full light of day.